On February 24, 2000, at approximately 1:38 in the afternoon, the body of 37-year-old Linda Fields was discovered beneath a low-hanging pine tree near the lakefront on Lake Avenue in Racine, Wisconsin. She had been strangled by hand. She was a mother, a sister, a woman whose family never stopped waiting for answers. For 23 years, the man responsible walked free. His DNA was everywhere investigators needed it to be, recovered from Linda's body, entered into every major law enforcement database, analyzed repeatedly over decades. And yet, the result was always the same. No match, no suspect, no arrest. Investigators interviewed witnesses for months. Detectives revisited the evidence again and again. In 2001, forensic analysts confirmed that every DNA sample recovered belonged to the same unknown man. The profile was uploaded into CODIS, Wisconsin's DNA databank, and the National Convicted Offenders System. Still nothing. 5 different suspects were tested over the years, and every one of them was eliminated. Additional evidence tested in 2005 pointed back to the exact same unidentified male. The case was reassigned multiple times. Fresh investigators reviewed thousands of pages, old interviews, forgotten leads, and dead ends that stretched across 2 decades. But the killer remained invisible. How does someone leave their DNA on a body and still disappear for over 20 years? The answer was terrifyingly simple. He had never been arrested. No fingerprints. No criminal record. No DNA in the system. It would take an entirely new kind of science to finally expose him. In 2020, Racine police reopened the case with renewed urgency. Advanced forensic genealogy testing was approved, and the remaining DNA was sent for specialized genome sequencing. In early 2022, investigators identified a close biological relative of the unknown contributor. One by one, family members were ruled out, until only one name remained: Lucas Asensio Alonso. Investigators tracked him from Alabama back to Illinois. On February 21, 2023, just one day before the 23rd anniversary of Linda's death, police secretly obtained his DNA during a traffic stop. It matched perfectly. The odds of the DNA belonging to anyone else were estimated at 1 in 1 quadrillion. Alonso, then 66 years old, had lived an ordinary life for more than 2 decades after Linda's death. He had never once appeared on law enforcement radar. According to investigators, he admitted meeting Linda at a bar the night she disappeared. He admitted becoming angry during an encounter near the lakefront, and he admitted choking her multiple times before leaving her behind beneath the pine tree. For 23 years, Linda Fields waited for justice from inside a cold case file. Then science finally caught up to the man who thought he had vanished forever. But the next case stayed buried even longer. 36 years. And solving it required investigators to exhume a body from a Texas graveyard. Donna Sue Hyatt. On July 8, 1987, 38-year-old Donna Sue Hyatt was found dead inside her home in Carlsbad, New Mexico. She had been stabbed and strangled. Earlier that night, witnesses saw her walking with a tall, unidentified man shortly before she died. Donna Sue was known as kind, warm, and endlessly friendly. She was active in her church, devoted to her daughters, and deeply loved by her family. Then she was taken from them without warning. Police chased countless leads over the years. Suspects came and went. DNA testing in 2010 revived hope briefly, but no match was found in any database. The case went cold again. For 36 years, no one knew who walked into Donna Sue Hyatt's home that night. Then forensic genetic genealogy changed everything. Advanced DNA sequencing pointed investigators toward a man named Michael Ruff Wigley, a violent offender from Texas with a disturbing history involving women. But there was one major problem. Wigley had been dead since 1989. He died in a traffic accident just 2 years after Donna Sue's murder. Investigators couldn't interrogate him. They couldn't prosecute him. They couldn't put him on trial. So they dug him up. With court approval, authorities exhumed Wigley's body from a cemetery in Amarillo, Texas. DNA extracted from his remains conclusively identified him as the man responsible for Donna Sue Hyatt's murder. After 36 years, her daughters finally had the truth. But they would never get a courtroom, never hear a guilty verdict, never watch the man responsible face justice. The killer died decades before science learned how to find him. And then came one of the most haunting cold case breakthroughs of all. Kathy Schwartz, December 2nd, 1988, Three Rivers, Michigan. 19-year-old Kathy Sue Schwartz was home alone with her infant daughter while her fiancé, Mike Warner, worked his shift. When he returned home that afternoon, he noticed traces smeared along the stair railing. Then he heard the baby crying. Kathy's body was found in another room. She had been beaten, stabbed repeatedly, strangled, and her throat had been cut. Blood covered the walls. A horrifying message had been written at the scene. "I was here." The killer left behind a fingerprint on a pink telephone, a bloody footprint, DNA evidence, and somehow still vanished. For decades, investigators interviewed thousands of people across the small Michigan community. Family members were fingerprinted and ruled out. Former boyfriends were investigated and cleared. The fingerprint sat untouched in the system for 35 years with no match. Then, buried deep inside a 10,000-page case file, investigators found a single forgotten name: Robert Waters. In 2022, advanced genealogy testing connected DNA from the crime scene to the Waters family. 3 brothers were eliminated one by one until only Robert Odell Waters remained. Investigators traveled to South Carolina in April 2023 and executed search warrants at his home. The fingerprint matched. The footprint matched. The DNA matched. Waters had been a childhood friend of Kathy's fiancé. He had visited the apartment before the murder and knew the layout. He knew the doors were often unlocked. And for 35 years, he quietly lived as a respected businessman, husband, and father in another state, while a fingerprint he left on a pink telephone waited for technology to catch up to him. He was arrested. 5 days later, he was found dead in his jail cell after taking his own life. Beside him were pamphlets about forgiveness. No trial. No confession in court. No answers about why. Only silence. And one terrifying realization. Some killers don't disappear because they are criminal masterminds. They disappear because the technology to identify them simply didn't exist yet. But the next case was solved because of something almost impossible to imagine. A piece of chewing gum. Barbara Tucker, January 15, 1980. 19-year-old Barbara Mae Tucker was heading to class at Mount Hood Community College in Oregon when she was attacked near campus. Witnesses later described seeing a terrified woman running from the woods with blood on her face, while a man watched from the bushes. Nobody stopped to help. Some thought it was a prank. Moments later, Barbara was dragged back into the darkness. Her body was found the next morning. For 44 years, her family waited for answers. Then genetic genealogist C.C. Moore uncovered an astonishing clue from the DNA evidence. The suspect almost certainly had red hair. It became one of the strongest phenotype predictions Paraben Nanolabs had ever produced. Investigators eventually identified Robert Plimpton and placed him under surveillance. While riding his bicycle near the Sandy River, Plimpton spit out a piece of chewing gum onto the path. Detectives collected it. The DNA matched perfectly. 44 years after Barbara Tucker was murdered, a discarded piece of gum finally exposed the man responsible. And what investigators discovered afterward was chilling. Years after Barbara's murder, Plimpton had kidnapped another woman in broad daylight and attempted to bind her with tape. He accumulated violent accusations, restraining orders, and criminal charges throughout his life while remaining free. In October 2024, he was sentenced to life in prison. Barbara's mother had spent years writing notes about every lead, every conversation, every tiny update in the case. She died in 1995 without ever knowing who killed her daughter. But the truth finally arrived anyway, 44 years late. And the stories only became darker from there. But even Barbara Tucker's case was not the longest mystery investigators would face. The next breakthrough came from 4 tiny arm hairs, preserved for nearly 3 decades inside an evidence envelope in Montana. Danielle Houchins, September 21, 1996. 15-year-old Danielle Houchins left her home in Belgrade, Montana after an argument with her family. She drove to the Cameron Bridge fishing access site near the Gallatin River to clear her mind. She never came home. Hours later, her truck was found abandoned in the parking lot. Her keys and water bottle were still inside. Search teams combed the area until darkness forced them to stop. But 2 local brothers kept searching after everyone else went home. One of them found Danielle's body face down in a shallow marsh. The official cause of death was listed as drowning, but bruises and evidence of violence covered her body. 4 rootless arm hairs were discovered and preserved as evidence. Then came one of the most controversial decisions in the entire case. Authorities refused to officially classify Danielle's death as a homicide. For years, her family fought not only for answers, but for investigators to even acknowledge what had happened to her. Her younger sister Stephanie became the public face of that fight. She spent decades pushing the case back into the spotlight, refusing to let Danielle's name disappear. 28 years passed. Then those 4 arm hairs finally spoke. In 2024, forensic genealogy connected the DNA to a man named Paul Hutchinson, a longtime fisheries biologist working for the Bureau of Land Management in Montana. He had no criminal history, no violent record, no connection to Danielle whatsoever. When investigators confronted him outside his office, they noticed something strange immediately. He was sweating heavily, chewing on his hand, unable to sit still. As they showed him Danielle's photograph, he visibly collapsed emotionally during the interview. 10 hours later, Paul Hutchinson was dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. DNA taken afterward confirmed a perfect match to the hairs found on Danielle's body nearly 3 decades earlier. The family finally got a name. But once again, there would be no courtroom, no sentence, no public confession, just another cold case solved too late. And then came a case so old investigators believed it might never be solved at all. Mary Schleiz, February 15, 1974. 25-year-old Mary Schleiz left Minneapolis intending to hitchhike to an art show in Chicago, something many young people did in the 1970s without fear. She never arrived. A witness later saw a man throw a woman's body from a moving vehicle into a snowy ditch in rural Wisconsin. Mary had been stabbed over a dozen times. At the scene, investigators found one seemingly insignificant item: a blue and orange stocking cap. That hat would sit in evidence storage for 50 years. 5 decades of dead ends, 5 decades of failed leads, 5 decades of detectives retiring before seeing answers. Then modern genetic genealogy uncovered an obstacle investigators never expected. The killer had been adopted. That single fact made traditional family tree tracking extraordinarily difficult because his biological connections were hidden behind sealed records and legal documents. But eventually, investigators broke through the wall. The DNA led them to John Keith Miller, an 84-year-old man living quietly inside an assisted living facility in Minnesota. When confronted, Miller confessed. He admitted picking Mary up while she hitchhiked. He admitted making advances toward her, and when she rejected him, he stabbed her repeatedly before dumping her body beside the road. For 50 years, he believed one tiny detail had protected him forever. A witness had described the wrong car color. He thought investigators were searching for a gold vehicle instead of blue. That mistake allowed him to disappear into ordinary life for half a century, until DNA finally found him anyway. He was sentenced to life in prison in 2025, 50 years after Mary Schleiss died alone in a snowy ditch. But perhaps the most disturbing case on this list involved a child taken in broad daylight by a complete stranger. Morgan Jade Viole, July 24, 1996. Bowling Green, Kentucky. Morgan was outside playing with a friend at the Colony Apartments during summer vacation when a maroon Chevrolet van pulled into the parking lot. The driver stepped out. First, he tried grabbing the other child, but she escaped. Then he seized Morgan and threw her into the van before speeding away. Witnesses saw the vehicle. Morgan's older sister heard the screams. The entire city entered panic. 3 months later, skeletal remains were discovered in woods near White House, Tennessee. Morgan had been murdered by a stranger traveling down Interstate 65. For 30 years, investigators had almost nothing except fibers, witness descriptions, and one critical piece of evidence: a single strand of hair recovered from vacuum sweepings inside the stolen van. That hair sat untouched in storage for decades because the technology to fully analyze it did not yet exist. Finally, in 2026, advanced FBI testing extracted a usable DNA profile. And unlike many of the other cases, this one didn't require genealogy. The DNA produced a direct CODIS hit. The name that appeared horrified investigators: Robert Scott Froberg, a violent escaped convict with a long history of armed robbery, prison escapes, and disturbing behavior involving children. At the time Morgan was abducted, Froberg was already on the run across multiple states after escaping custody. When investigators interviewed him in prison decades later, he confessed in detail. Morgan had been completely random. Wrong place, wrong time. A little girl playing outside on a summer afternoon while a predator drove past the apartment complex. 30 years later, a single strand of hair finally gave Morgan her voice back. And that may be the most terrifying part of every case on this list. Many of these killers were not criminal masterminds. Some had no records. Some blended quietly into society. Some died before they could ever face justice. But they all left something behind. A fingerprint, a hair, a stocking cap, a straw, a piece of chewing gum. Tiny fragments of evidence sitting silently for decades, waiting for science to evolve enough to hear them speak. But perhaps no case on this entire list exposed the dangers of a broken investigation more than the murder of Teresa Fusco. Because before the real killer was identified, 3 innocent men lost nearly 20 years of their lives for a crime they did not commit. November 10, 1984. Lynbrook, Long Island. Teenager Teresa Fusco was last seen leaving the Hot Skates roller rink late at night after losing her part-time job at the snack bar. Witnesses said she was crying as she walked home alone. She never made it back. Nearly a month later, her body was discovered hidden beneath leaves, debris, and wooden pallets in a wooded area near the rink. She had been beaten, assaulted, and strangled. The community panicked. At the time, 2 other young women had also disappeared nearby, creating fears that a serial predator was stalking the area. Police were under enormous pressure to solve the case quickly, and that pressure changed everything. Investigators interrogated a young man named John Coggott for nearly 18 hours. Eventually, after repeated questioning and psychological exhaustion, he signed a confession written largely by detectives themselves. Then 2 more men were implicated: John Restivo, Dennis Halstead. All 3 were convicted in 1986. All 3 insisted they were innocent from the very beginning. Years passed. Then DNA testing began unraveling the entire case. The biological evidence recovered from Teresa Fusco's body excluded every single convicted man. One by one, the convictions collapsed. By 2003, all 3 men were finally freed after spending approximately 18 years behind bars for a crime they never committed. The fallout was massive. Millions of dollars in settlements, national attention, and one horrifying truth: the real killer had never been found. For decades afterward, the DNA profile recovered from the scene remained unidentified. The case went cold all over again. Then, nearly 40 years after Teresa Fusco was murdered, advanced forensic genealogy reopened the investigation from scratch. Investigators built a complete genetic profile from preserved evidence and began tracing biological relatives through genealogy databases. Eventually, the trail led to Richard Bilo, a man who had lived quietly for decades less than a mile from where Teresa disappeared. Police placed him under surveillance in 2024. One day, investigators recovered a discarded smoothie cup and straw after he threw them away outside a cafe. The DNA matched perfectly. After 40 years, the unknown profile finally had a name. Richard Bilo had no serious criminal history, no major arrests, no obvious warning signs. He worked overnight shifts at Walmart and lived alone in a quiet neighborhood. For 4 decades, he blended into ordinary life, while 3 innocent men carried the weight of his crime. When questioned by investigators, Bilo reportedly made a chilling statement. People got away with it back then, but science had finally caught up. He was arrested in 2025 and charged with second-degree murder. As of 2026, the case remains pending trial. And Teresa Fusco's family, after losing decades to both violence and wrongful convictions, are still waiting for final justice. But the next case may be even harder to comprehend, because investigators eventually solved it using clothing preserved from a Texas crime scene for nearly 40 years. And by the time the killer's name was identified, he had already been dead for years. Ricky Herridge, March 7, 1987. Athens, Texas. 29-year-old Ricky Herridge disappeared after going out for the night. The following afternoon, his body was discovered beneath a bridge near Walnut Creek. He had been shot multiple times. Investigators preserved his clothing carefully, but in 1987, there was little forensic technology available to do much more than basic analysis. The case slowly faded. Years turned into decades. Family members kept hopping for answers, while original detectives retired one after another. Then in 2019, the Henderson County Sheriff's Office reopened the investigation. Modern forensic testing extracted DNA from the preserved clothing, but CODIS produced no match. So investigators turned to genetic genealogy. The DNA eventually pointed to a man named Dallas Reynolds Casanova. Authorities confirmed his DNA was present on Ricky's clothing. But once again, the answer came too late. Casanova had died in 2008. No trial, no interrogation, no explanation for motive, no opportunity for Ricky's family to hear why it happened. After 38 years, they finally received a name, but not the justice they had imagined all those years. And then came one of the darkest and most disturbing cases, solved through modern DNA technology. A child abducted in broad daylight, a predator hiding in plain sight, and a single strand of hair waiting silently inside an evidence locker for 30 years before science finally learned how to read it. Morgan Jade Violi. July 24, 1996. A hot summer afternoon in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Children were outside playing in the parking lot of the Colony Apartments while parents moved in and out of nearby buildings, unaware that within seconds, an ordinary day was about to become every family's worst nightmare. 8-year-old Morgan Jade Violi was laughing with a friend when a maroon Chevrolet van slowly pulled into the lot. The driver stepped out. Witnesses later said he first lunged toward the other child, but she managed to break free and run. Then he grabbed Morgan. He lifted her into the back of the van and sped away before anyone could stop him. Her older sister Heather heard the screams and ran outside just in time to see the van disappearing. Within minutes, panic spread across Bowling Green. Roadblocks were established. Flyers covered telephone poles. The FBI joined the search and offered a reward. Parents stopped allowing children outside alone. Churches opened their doors for vigils and community gatherings. But Morgan was already gone. 3 months later, on October 20th, 1996, skeletal remains were discovered in a wooded area near White House, Tennessee. The man responsible had driven south on Interstate 65, pulled into a secluded area near a barn, and ended Morgan's life before abandoning her body in the woods. Her clothing was discarded separately. The stolen van was recovered days after the abduction at a truck stop in Tennessee. Investigators searched every inch of it for evidence and recovered fibers, fingerprints, and debris. Among the material collected during vacuum sweeps was a single strand of hair. At the time, it meant almost nothing. In 1996, forensic science simply was not advanced enough to identify a killer from one degraded strand. So the hair sat in storage, year after year, decade after decade. Meanwhile, the investigation consumed countless hours. Detectives chased leads across multiple states. Witnesses were re-interviewed. Composite sketches were distributed nationwide. Nothing worked. The case slowly became one of Kentucky's most haunting unsolved child abductions. Then technology finally changed everything. 30 years later, FBI forensic specialists successfully extracted a DNA profile from that single hair recovered inside the van. And unlike many modern cold cases, investigators didn't need genealogy websites or distant relatives to identify the suspect. The DNA hit directly in CODIS. The name that appeared shocked investigators. Robert Scott Froberg, a violent career criminal already sitting in an Alabama prison. His background was horrifying. Armed robbery convictions, multiple prison escapes, violent behavior, disturbing incidents involving children. In July 1996, the same month Morgan disappeared, Froberg had escaped custody yet again and stolen the maroon van used in the kidnapping. Investigators later learned he had been moving across several states while desperately avoiding capture. Morgan had simply crossed paths with him at the worst possible moment. When detectives finally confronted Froberg in prison in February 2026, he waived his rights and confessed in detail. Morgan had not known him. There was no connection, no motive beyond opportunity. A predator driving down the interstate saw children playing and acted without hesitation. For 30 years, Morgan's family waited for answers, while the evidence sat silently inside a locker. One strand of hair finally broke the silence. And maybe that is what makes all of these cases so unsettling. For decades, the killers believed time had protected them. They built careers, raised families, started businesses, moved to new states. Some died peacefully believing they had escaped justice forever. But science kept evolving. Tiny fragments, once considered useless, became impossible to ignore. A fingerprint on a telephone, DNA on a tank top, forearm hairs in a marsh, a stocking cap in a snowy ditch, chewing gum on a bike path, a smoothie straw thrown in the trash, one forgotten strand of hair inside a stolen van. The evidence never forgot. It just waited for the world to catch up. And that may be the most chilling truth behind every case on this list. The evidence was always there, waiting, silent, hidden inside boxes stacked on dusty shelves, in police storage rooms across America. For decades, investigators could only hope that someday technology would become powerful enough to hear what those tiny fragments were trying to say. Then suddenly, everything changed. A fingerprint once thought useless could identify a killer 35 years later. A single hair without a root could expose a man who had never committed another known crime. A discarded straw, a coffee cup, or a piece of chewing gum could unravel an entire lifetime of lies. Cold cases stopped depending on confessions. They stopped depending on eyewitnesses. And they stopped depending on whether the killer had ever been arrested before. Now the evidence itself could speak. That shift has completely transformed criminal investigation across the United States. Thousands of unsolved cases are currently being re-examined using forensic genetic genealogy, the same technology that helped identify the Golden State Killer and many of the cases you've heard today. Investigators are reopening murders from the 1970s, 80s, and 90s because science can now do things detectives once considered impossible. DNA no longer needs to match the killer directly. It can identify cousins, distant relatives, entire family trees. And from there, investigators narrow the search until only one person remains. For many families, that breakthrough comes after decades of grief. Parents die before seeing answers. Children grow into adults without knowing who took their loved one away. Some families spend half their lives attending vigils, giving interviews, and begging the public not to forget a name. Then one phone call changes everything. A detective finally says, "We found him." But closure is rarely simple. Some suspects die before arrest. Some end their own lives after being identified. Some cases still never explain motive. And some families are left struggling with an unbearable reality. The killer may have lived peacefully for decades while they suffered every single day. That is what makes these stories so haunting. Not just the violence, not just the mystery, but the time. 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, entire lifetimes spent waiting for answers. And yet, despite all of that time, many of these cases were ultimately solved by things so unbelievably small they could fit in the palm of your hand. A hair, a fingerprint, a trace of skin cells, a drop of saliva, tiny fragments that killers never noticed leaving behind. Tiny fragments that waited patiently for science to evolve. And maybe somewhere tonight, inside another evidence locker in another forgotten cold case, there is still one final piece waiting to speak. A single strand, a single print, a single mistake, waiting for the day technology finally catches up to it too. The cold cases that refuse to stay buried. For decades, investigators believed time was the greatest enemy in a homicide investigation. Witnesses forget details. Memories fade. Physical evidence deteriorates. Detectives retire. Families lose hope. And eventually, most cold cases are quietly transferred into old filing cabinets where they remain untouched for years. But modern forensic science has completely rewritten that reality. Today, time is no longer protecting the people responsible. In many ways, time is now working against them. Because every year that passes, DNA technology becomes more advanced. Evidence once considered unusable is suddenly capable of identifying someone with astonishing precision. Investigators can now build complete genetic profiles from degraded samples that would have been impossible to analyze 20 years ago. And that terrifying reality is changing everything. Across the United States, investigators are reopening murders that happened in the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s. Cases that once seemed impossible are suddenly producing names. The stories you have heard today are not isolated miracles. They are part of an entirely new era of criminal investigation. An era where killers who believe they escape justice forever are discovering that the evidence never truly disappeared. It waited. And perhaps one of the most unsettling parts of all these cases is how ordinary many of the suspects appeared. Not serial killers hiding in shadows. Not fugitives constantly running from police. Many of them blended quietly into normal life. They became fathers, business owners, neighbors, employees, church members, retirees. Some spent decades attending family gatherings and community events, while investigators worked cold case files just a few states away trying to identify them. That contrast is deeply disturbing because it forces an uncomfortable question. How many people are capable of carrying a secret like that for decades? How many people went home after committing unimaginable violence and simply continued living? For the families left behind, that question can become unbearable. Many relatives describe cold cases as a different kind of grief. When someone dies from illness or an accident, there is pain, but eventually there are answers. A funeral, a timeline, an understanding of what happened. But in unsolved murders, the uncertainty never stops. Families replay the final hours repeatedly in their minds. They wonder whether their loved one suffered, whether they were afraid, whether someone nearby could have intervened, whether the person responsible is still watching from a distance. That uncertainty can consume entire generations. Children grow up attending memorial events for parents they barely remember. Brothers and sisters spend decades speaking to detectives and journalists. Parents die before learning the truth. And in many cold cases, family members begin fearing the answer may never come. Then suddenly, one day the phone rings. A detective says they have identified someone. Everything changes. Some families describe that moment as surreal. Not joy, not relief, something stranger. Because after waiting 20 or 30 years, many no longer truly believed an arrest would happen. Some had emotionally prepared themselves to never know. Then science reopened wounds they had spent decades trying to survive. In some cases, investigators arrive with astonishing details. The killer was someone living quietly 2 towns away. The killer died years ago. The killer had a family, The killer attended church. The killer had never been arrested. And suddenly, relatives are forced to process a reality they never imagined. The person responsible existed in the world this entire time, sometimes incredibly close. And while many cases now end with arrests, others reveal something more tragic. The suspect dies before charges can be filed. That outcome has become increasingly common in genealogy cases because investigators are solving crimes committed 40 or 50 years earlier. By the time science catches up, the suspect may already be elderly or deceased. For families, that creates complicated emotions. They finally have answers, but they never get the courtroom. No public confession, no sentencing, no chance to look the person responsible in the eye. Just a name. Sometimes that is enough. Sometimes it is not. And another deeply unsettling reality has emerged from these investigations. Many of the people identified through genetic genealogy had no major criminal history, no violent records, no prior DNA samples, nothing placing them inside law enforcement databases. For decades, investigators relied heavily on CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System. But CODIS only works if the offender's DNA already exists in the system. That usually requires prior arrests or convictions. If the person responsible had never been arrested, their DNA remained invisible. That is why so many of these cases remained unsolved for decades. The evidence existed. The technology did not. Genetic genealogy changed that forever. Instead of searching for the suspect directly, investigators now search for relatives. A distant cousin uploads DNA to a genealogy website. A family member takes an ancestry test. Investigators begin building enormous family trees. Names branch outward through marriages, births, and generations. Eventually, detectives narrow the possibilities using geography, age, criminal history, witness statements, and timelines. Sometimes they eliminate dozens of people before identifying one final candidate. Then comes surveillance. Detectives quietly follow the suspect, waiting, watching, hopping for discarded DNA. A cigarette, a coffee cup, a water bottle, chewing gum, a straw, a napkin. And when that abandoned item matches the evidence from decades earlier, the investigation transforms instantly. Cold cases that sat untouched for half a century suddenly become active homicide prosecutions. For many investigators, solving these crimes becomes deeply personal. Some detectives inherit cases from officers who spent entire careers searching for answers. Others keep photographs of victims on their desks for years. Some continue working cases long after retirement, because cold cases carry a different emotional weight. The victims become frozen in time. A teenager remains forever 17. A young mother remains forever 37. An 8-year-old child remains forever 8. Meanwhile, the world keeps moving. Technology changes. Neighborhoods change. Families age. And somewhere out there, the person responsible grows older too, perhaps believing they escaped forever. That belief often shapes how suspects react once confronted. Some immediately confess. Others deny everything despite overwhelming evidence. Some become emotional. Some remain eerily calm. And some take their own lives shortly after investigators identify them. That pattern has appeared repeatedly in genealogy cases. Experts believe many suspects convince themselves the crime has disappeared with time. When detectives suddenly appear decades later holding DNA evidence, the psychological collapse can be immediate. the past they buried returns all at once, and sometimes they cannot face it. The ethical questions surrounding genetic genealogy have also sparked major debate. Supporters argue the technology has delivered justice in cases once considered hopeless. Critics worry about privacy concerns and the use of public genealogy databases. Some fear a future where genetic information becomes too accessible. Others argue families of victims deserve every available tool to identify violent offenders. The debate continues evolving as more cases are solved. But one reality is impossible to ignore. The results have been extraordinary. Murders unsolved for 50 years are suddenly producing arrests. Unknown victims are finally receiving names. Families who spent decades waiting are finally hearing answers. And investigators now believe thousands more cold cases may eventually be solved using similar methods. Yet even with these breakthroughs, not every mystery ends cleanly. Sometimes evidence has degraded too severely. Sometimes genealogical lines become too complicated. Sometimes there are multiple possible suspects, but not enough surviving DNA to confirm one conclusively. And sometimes the truth raises more questions than answers. Why did the crime happen? Was it random? Was there another victim? Did the suspect commit additional offenses never connected to them? Many genealogy identifications have forced investigators to reopen entirely separate cases searching for links. One identified suspect can suddenly become connected to assaults, disappearances, or murders investigators never previously connected. That possibility terrifies experts, because if one unknown offender remained hidden for 40 years, there may be others. And somewhere tonight, there are almost certainly evidence boxes still waiting. Inside those boxes are fragments once considered meaningless, a fingerprint too partial to identify, a degraded strand of hair, a trace amount of saliva, skin cells on old clothing, tiny biological remnants frozen in time. Future technology may eventually unlock all of them. Cases investigators abandoned decades ago could suddenly become solvable overnight. And that possibility is changing how modern investigators preserve evidence today. Crime scene processing has become dramatically more meticulous. Items once ignored are now carefully collected because forensic scientists understand future technology may reveal things impossible to detect now. In some ways, every current investigation is also being prepared for future science. What seems unusable today may become decisive evidence 20 years from now. That idea is both fascinating and unsettling, because it means many offenders walking free today may already have left behind the evidence that will eventually identify them. They simply do not know it yet. And perhaps that is the most powerful lesson hidden inside every story you heard. Violence leaves traces. Always. Maybe not immediately visible. Maybe not immediately understandable. But traces remain. Human beings shed DNA constantly. Hair, skin, sweat, saliva, fingerprints, microscopic fragments invisible to the naked eye. For decades, killers unknowingly left pieces of themselves behind at crime scenes, while his hospitalized mother, something he did every single day, his brother James went to check on him. The door was closed but unlocked. Inside were obvious signs music of a struggle, traces of evidence everywhere, broken pieces of a statue, a television and stereo music blaring, shattered furniture. Stephen's body was found in bed under a blanket. He had music, suffered stab wounds and blunt force trauma. On the bedroom wall, someone had written the word greed using evidence from the scene. A custom-made solid gold identification bracelet engraved with Stephen's name, a piece his mother had made for each of her children, had been stolen. Stephen Edenfield was an openly gay man in the 1990s who kept his dating life extremely private, even from his own family. That privacy made the investigation extraordinarily difficult. He had mentioned dating someone called Carlos, but investigators were never able to identify this person. The person in the second car at the gate was never found. What happens to a case when the victim's private life is so carefully hidden that even the people closest to him cannot help investigators piece music together his final hours? The Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office struggled for years to develop leads. Clothing found at the scene, socks and a tank music top contained both the victim's traces and an unknown DNA profile, but no match could be made through any available database. The case was featured on the Sheriff's Office's Unfinished Business podcast in 2021 and again in 2024, with photographs of the stolen bracelet shared publicly in hopes someone might recognize it. In 2022, the Cold Case Unit sent evidence to RM Incorporated for forensic-grade genome sequencing funded by a Bureau of Justice Assistance music grant. By 2024, a previously unknown DNA profile had been developed from the tank top. Then came the break. On January 10, 2025, the DNA profile was linked through an FBI database to a 2005 unsolved case in Waukegan, Illinois. The suspect in that case was a man named Brandon Gleha. On January 22nd, detectives discreetly collected Gleha's DNA in Tampa, where he was living. On January 31st, 2025, exactly 28 years to the day after music, Stephen Edenfield's passing, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement confirmed the DNA match. On February 5th, Gleha was arrested on an unrelated Illinois forgery warrant. During booking, another sample matched evidence from the crime scene. Brandon Gleha was 47 at the time of arrest and had been approximately 19 when Stephen was taken. When confronted, he claimed a person named Chino Music had picked him up in a car and that the two of them had met Edenfield before following him home. He admitted throwing a statue music at the victim and striking him, but denied the stabbing. The sheriff's music office stated they were not investigating any other individuals in connection with the case. Gleha confessed. He was charged on February 24, 2025, with first-degree taking of life with a weapon and robbery with a deadly weapon. He is being held without bond at Fahlenberg Road Jail in Tampa. The case is pending trial. A DNA profile from a tank top linked a 1997 case in Florida to an unsolved 2005 case in Illinois and led investigators to a man Music, living quietly in the same city where the original act took place. But the next case is one of the most complex on this entire list because before they found the right person, 3 innocent men spent nearly 18 years behind bars for music, something they did not do. Teresa Fusco. On Saturday night, November 10, 1984, a young woman was last seen leaving the Hot Skates roller rink in Lynbrook, Nassau County, Long Island at approximately 9:45 in the evening. She was crying. She had just been let go from her part-time job at the snack bar. Her home was 4 blocks away. She was walking. On December 5th, her body was found in a wooded area near the rink, unclothed, buried under leaves, debris, and shipping pallets. She had been harmed, beaten, and strangled with a ligature. Evidence collected during the examination revealed DNA from an unknown contributor. The case sent shock waves through the tight-knit Lynbrook community. It was made worse by the fact that 2 other young women had gone missing nearby around the same time, creating what became known as the Lynbrook Triangle. The pressure on investigators was immense, and that pressure would lead to one of the worst miscarriages of justice in New York State history. Under enormous public pressure, Nassau County Police interviewed approximately 400 people. In March 1985, John Coggett, 21, was arrested after nearly 18 hours of interrogation that produced a coerced confession, a 7-page statement handwritten by a detective. The 6th version, after 5 earlier attempts, were never written down. Coggett implicated two other men, John Restivo, 26, and Dennis H. Halstead, 31. All three were convicted in 1986. Coggett received 31 years to life. Restivo and Halstead each received 33 years and 4 months to life. All three maintained their innocence from day one. The Centurion Ministries took up their cases in 1994. The Innocence Project joined in 1997. Multiple rounds of DNA testing over the following decade excluded all three men. In June 2003, after approximately 17 to 18 years of music, wrongful imprisonment, all three convictions were vacated. Coggett was retreated in a 2005 bench trial music and found not guilty with a landmark ruling that admitted expert testimony on false confessions for the first time in music, New York State. Charges against Restivo and Halstead were dismissed. In 2014, a federal jury awarded Restivo and Halstead $18 million each. Three innocent men had lost nearly 2 decades of their lives, and the unknown DNA profile from the original evidence still could not be matched. The case went cold again. How do you go back to square one after 3 wrongful convictions, $18 million settlements, and 4 decades of pain? You go back to the DNA. In August 2023, Nassau County investigators sent preserved evidence to ARM Incorporated for advanced sequencing. ARM built a comprehensive profile, which the FBI's Investigative Genetic Genealogy Unit used to identify possible relatives. The trail led to a man named Richard Bilo. Investigators placed him under surveillance. In February 2024, they recovered a smoothie cup and straw he had discarded at a Suffolk County cafe. DNA from the straw was a 100% match with the 1984 crime scene evidence. Richard Bilo, 63 at arrest, had been 23 at the time of the original incident. In 1984, he had lived with his grandparents in Lynbrook, approximately 1 mile from both the roller rink and the victim's home. He told investigators he had operated a mobile coffee truck in the area at the time of his arrest. He lived alone in Center Moricas, Suffolk County, working overnight shifts at a Walmart. He had no known prior criminal record and had spent 40 years without a single arrest. When questioned days before his arrest, he reportedly told investigators, "People got away with it back then." Nassau County District Attorney Donnelly responded publicly, "It's 2025 and I got you now." Bilo was arrested on October 14, 2025, and indicted on 2 counts of secondary taking of life. He pleaded not guilty and was remanded to Nassau County Jail. His court-appointed attorney maintains his client's innocence, citing the history of 3 prior wrongful convictions in the same case. Bilo faces up to 25 years to life if convicted. The victim's father, Thomas Fusco, attended the arraignment and pulled a small photograph from his suit jacket pocket. Her mother passed away in 2019 without ever seeing an arrest. As of March 2026, the case is pending trial. 3 innocent men spent nearly 2 decades in prison. The real person responsible lived quietly for 40 years working the overnight shift at a Walmart a few towns over. But the next case was solved by an even more unlikely path. Forensic sequencing of clothing preserved from a crime scene in rural Texas nearly 4 decades earlier. Ricky Harridge. On the night of Saturday, March 7, 1987, 29-year-old Ricky Harridge went out in the Athens area of Henderson County, Texas, and never came home. The next afternoon, around 1:00 in the afternoon on March 8th, a man picking up beer cans along a creek bank discovered Harridge's body beneath a bridge on County Road 1500 near Walnut Creek. He had been shot music multiple times. Clothing was collected from the scene and preserved. The circumstances of how he ended up at the bridge or who he had been with that night music remained unclear. Harridge was a carpenter who was actively pursuing higher education at the time of his passing. His family had relocated to the Athens area from Anson, Texas, when he was an infant. His surviving sister, Virginia Harridge Pepper, described him as the protector, the big brother, and the rock music of the family. The kind of man who would confront a friend for using him inappropriate language in front of his music sister, even as adults. He had a daughter and a stepson. His mother, Annette, never stopped music hopping for answers. The Henderson County Sheriff's Office investigated extensively, receiving numerous leads and developing multiple theories over the years, but no motive, no suspect, and no arrest ever materialized. The person ultimately identified was, in the sheriff's words, on nobody's radar. As original investigators retired one by one, the case languished. Virginia started a Facebook memorial page in 2015 to keep her brother's name in the public eye. In 2019, Sheriff Bodie Hillhouse ordered the case reopened. Clothing from the original 1987 scene was sent to Pure Gold Forensics in California, which extracted a traditional DNA profile and uploaded it to CODIS Music Namach. The sheriff's office then partnered with Season of Justice, a nonprofit that funds advanced forensic testing. In 2022, evidence was submitted to ARAM Incorporated for forensic-grade genome sequencing. ATHRAM's Forensic Genetic Genealogy Team, assisted by the FBI Dallas Violent Music Crimes Task Force, using advanced genealogical methods, produced investigative music leads that pointed to a name Dallas Reynolds Casanova. On November 7, 2025, Music, the Henderson County Sheriff's Office announced the identification. Casanova had resided in Henderson County at the time of the incident. His DNA was confirmed present on Harridge's clothing. No known motive or relationship between the two music men has ever been established, but there was a problem that was by now familiar in these cases. Casanova had passed away music in 2008 in New Orleans, Louisiana. He could never face prosecution. Sheriff Hillhouse stated, "I personally feel like if it went before a jury in today's time, Dallas Casanova would have been convicted. Unfortunately, he is deceased and we weren't able to bring him to justice." Mother Annette Harridge, who had waited 38 years, still wants to know why. Sister Virginia expressed gratitude music, but said plainly, "Case closed just doesn't do it for me. We still don't have music justice." This was the 24th case in Texas solved using technology. A name on preserved clothing from 1987, a man who had been gone since 2008, and a family that waited 38 years for a truth that still feels incomplete. But the final case on this list is the one that may stay with you the longest because it involves the youngest victim, the most disturbing perpetrator, and a single strand of hair that sat in an evidence locker for 3 decades before the technology existed to read it. Morgan Jade Violi. On July 24, 1996, Music, in broad daylight during summer vacation, a young girl was playing outside with a friend in the parking lot of the Colony Apartments in Bowling Green, Kentucky. A man in a maroon Chevrolet van pulled in. Music exited the vehicle and first tried to grab the other child who escaped. He then grabbed Morgan Jade Violi, threw her into the back of the van, and sped away. Morgan's older sister, Heather, heard a scream and ran around to see the man sitting in the van. An adult witness described the vehicle and a license plate containing the letters Music, MN. A composite sketch was produced. The FBI offered a $25,000 reward. Morgan Jade Violi loved to dance, sing, and tell her older sisters she was bigger than them. United States Attorney Bum Garner said at the press conference announcing the case's resolution, "She was more than the worst thing that happened to her. She was a daughter. She was a little sister." The gay person responsible drove south on Interstate 65. Music exited at White House, Tennessee, pulled over near a barn, and ended Morgan's life using his hand and a music handkerchief. He left her body in the woods and discarded her clothes in a dumpster. Nearly 3 months later, on October 20, 1996, skeletal remains were found by a woman walking near her home in woods in White House, Robertson County, Tennessee. The stolen van was found abandoned 2 days after the abduction at a truck stop in Williamson County, Tennessee. Fiber from Morgan's hair matched the van's seat cushion, but the person who drove it could not be identified. For 30 years, Investigators worked the case without ever identifying a suspect. The FBI investigated extensively. Bowling Green police followed every lead. As recently as January 2026, they were still publicly soliciting tips. The case changed the way an entire city raised its children's churches filled as safe gathering music places. Parents stopped letting young ones play outside, unsupervised. Retired Major Maria Brown noted that random kidnappings are rare, and that rarity is precisely what made this case music so frightening. The breakthrough came from a single strand of hair recovered from vacuum sweepings of the stolen van in 1996, preserved in an evidence locker for 3 decades. Due to recent advancements in forensic DNA testing at music, the FBI laboratory, a profile was extracted from that hair and run through the National CODIS database. Unlike every other case on this list, this one did not require genetic genealogy. CODIS returned a direct match to a man named Robert Scott Froberg, already in the system because he was currently incarcerated in Alabama. Froberg's criminal history was extensive and deeply alarming. In December 1988, he was convicted of armed robbery in Alabama and sentenced to 40 years. While in music prison, officials found him with photographs of minors. In April 1996, he escaped from a work detail and fled across multiple states, robbing an elderly woman in Pennsylvania along the way. In May 1996, he was found hiding in a structure near a residential area in Dayton, Ohio, making contact with a young boy. He was apprehended nearby, but escaped again from a Pennsylvania facility in July by climbing a rain spout to the roof. On July 23rd, music, he stole the maroon van from Dayton, less than half a mile from where his parents lived. The next day, he took Music Morgan. On February 24, 2026, a Bowling Green detective and an FBI agent traveled to Montgomery, Alabama to interview Froberg. He waived his rights and confessed in full detail music to the kidnapping and taking of Morgan Jade Violi. He was 62. He had no connection to the victim. He was a stranger passing through Bowling Green on the interstate heading south. He pulled off the highway and a little girl happened to be playing in a parking lot. A federal criminal complaint was filed on February 26, 2026, charging Froberg with 1 count of kidnapping music, resulting in a fatality under federal statute. A charge that carries potential penalties of life in federal prison or the ultimate federal penalty. United States Attorney Bumgarner called it one of the most significant announcements by the office in at least a decade. As of March 2026, the prosecution is in its earliest stages with arraignment pending. Morgan Jade Violi was buried at Music, Bowling Green Garden Cemetery 30 years ago. A strand of hair from a stolen van finally spoke her name. Music, this was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Some change and more engaging.